So I think I've procrastinated long enough for it to be safe for me to make this video now. Hello everybody, welcome back to Meddling in Antiquity. My name is Teray, and today we are going to be discussing the much discussed 2019 film, Joker. Now before I actually get into discussing the film itself, I do want to make something very, very clear regarding what I'm going to be discussing about the film, in that it is my opinion, and I know that as soon as this video goes up, some gentle sir of the bearded neck variety will find it and will probably attack me in the comments for the things that I'm saying. However, I want to make it very clear that everything that I'm stating in this video is what I have taken away from the film, having watched it and having watched the film and then having waited for a little over a month to actually make this video. So I've been thinking and processing what I saw in the film for a while before I even decided I was ready to make this video. So I do want to make that clear. And for anyone who does want to feel like they have to argue any of the points that I make about the film, go ahead. I'd recommend that you, if you're going to, email me instead of commenting on the video, or do both. It doesn't really matter, but I'm not really going to respond to any comments on the video itself. So if you really do have a point that you think you really want to argue, email it and we can discuss it there. My email will be in the description. Now, let's get into the film. Joker 2019 was directed by Todd Phillips, starring, it had a really incredible cast. It was a fantastic cast, starring Robert De Niro as comedian, talk show host Murray Franklin, Frances Conroy, who I absolutely adore for her multiple roles as many different characters in American Horror Story, as our lead character's mother, Penny Fleck, Zazie Beetz, who a lot of people recognize as Domino from Deadpool 2, as Sophie, a neighbor of our main character, and then Joaquin Phoenix playing Arthur Fleck, or Joker, the titular character. Now, this film is kind of played out as a new origin story for Joker. And it's interesting simply because it's a different way that we've seen Joker before. And I think it's a very honest, it's a more honest way of visualizing the Joker. And it really does speak a lot to what is happening sociopolitically. And I was actually really tempted to discuss it in Sociopolitical Smackdown, but decided that I could do the same thing here, as I want to keep Sociopolitical Smackdown mainly for the television series that I cover on the channel. So this particular origin story for Joker is interesting in a few ways, in that we see the Joker suffering in a way that we don't really see the Joker suffering normally. So, and that's what eventually leads to his collapse, insanity, is all of this suffering and the abuse that he is going through. So now that I've kind of given you the briefest and vaguest of overviews of the plot, let's get into why I think a lot of people who idolize the Joker based off this movie missed the whole point of the film. A lot of people missed the point of Joker as a film. A lot of people, when it came out, assumed that it was glorifying the idea of the Joker's descent into madness and violence, and people took it as an excuse to use his mental illness as an excuse and a justification for what he did, when that is the entire opposite point of the film at all. The point of the film is to show people the consequences of what happens when we allow people who are mentally ill and who are suffering from mental illness to go through their lives with either very poor, little or to no support, and how that affects them. And in Arthur's case in particular, it is 100% exacerbated by the fact that his mother is also extremely mentally ill and nothing was done about it. Despite the fact that she was proven to be severely mentally ill and 100% incapable of caring for a child, she was still allowed to keep the one that she had. And that is a massive failure in the system, and one that very much mirrors what the adoption and foster system looks like today. But that's the point of the movie. It's not to glorify the idea of violence, it's to show the consequences of what happens when we allow people who are suffering like that, like Arthur, to go through their lives without access to cheap or free medication or any sort of support or therapy. I will be getting into a few spoilers, so if you've seen the film, you know that Arthur's therapy program is extremely underfunded, and about halfway through the film, their funding gets cut and they have to close down the entire play center where he's going for his talk therapy, which means he also loses the funding to be able to afford his medication. Therefore, he has to go without his medication. And that is extremely detrimental to someone who is in such an isolating circumstance, especially after the loss of the one person he had to actually talk to and communicate with in his life, his mother. So he experiences an extremely traumatic event, the death of his mother, and then on top of that, by that point, he'd already lost access to the medication that was helping him keep his job and stay sane. So it's a long train of things that all result in poor or no funding for him to be able to go and get the help that he was getting, that he knows that he needs, but that he can't afford without publicly city and government funded programs like the one he was participating in. And the worst part is that a lot of people took the behaviors of this mentally ill character, this person who is suffering immensely, and decided to start replicating those behaviors in public for their own amusement, for the shock effect of it. When in reality, the mental disorder that Arthur Fleck suffers from is a real disorder, and it is not something that should be treated like that. What he has is called pseudobulbar effect, and it can manifest in laughing fits, crying fits at inappropriate times, simply because there is a portion of a person's brain that the reactions are uncontrollable and oftentimes extremely inappropriate, simply because the emotional centers of the brain are just not working right. Those neurons are not firing correctly, which means that that person cannot make the appropriate emotional response. And the symptoms of that are symptoms that Arthur has that exacerbate every other symptom that he is suffering, because the symptoms are social isolation, simply because if you cannot produce a normal emotional response to something that's happening to you or to someone else, people aren't going to want you around. They're going to think that you think that either that the wrong things are a joke, or that there's things that should be entertaining and funny that make you extremely upset. And obviously social isolation, as a lot of people have experienced now with a lot of people being in quarantine, can lead to depression and anxiety. And on top of Arthur having suffered child abuse at the hands of his mother, it doesn't help his situation. So people replicating the behaviors of this person simply because they think it's cool is honestly disgusting. Because if you are someone who does that, you are trivializing something that people out there who are actually living with, and they actually suffer the consequences of this. Just because you don't care doesn't mean you get to trivialize the experience of people who are actually suffering because of something you think is a behavior you should glorify simply because you have a character you look up to that you really shouldn't. Get better idols. To quote Bailey Sarian, the Joker isn't someone you should idolize. Because here's the thing about Joker. You're not supposed to idolize Arthur's behavior. You are supposed to watch this man go through exactly what hundreds of people go through when a system that is supposed to help us fails spectacularly. When the people in power do not care about a group of people who are suffering, so they take any and all funding away from those people and direct it to something else that probably doesn't really need it. And then those people suffer. Arthur's situation is not of his own making, but that does not mean that the actions that he takes after he gets into this situation are right. We are not supposed to use Arthur's mental illness to justify his negative coping behavior, because his coping mechanisms are atrocious. But the reason that those coping mechanisms are atrocious are because people don't care enough about the mentally ill to be able to help them, or to want to help them, or to have any incentive to help them. So glorifying his behavior negates the entire point that the movie is trying to make, which is, this is what happens when the system fails. And we let people who need the help slip through the cracks. They go further and further down the rabbit hole, and they end up somewhere that is not healthy, that makes them a danger to themselves and to everyone around them. That's what the point of Joker was. It's not to make him seem like this badass anarchist, stick it to the man character, because he's not. He is a man who is mentally ill, who didn't get the help he needs, who knows that he needs help, but by the time it's finally offered to him in a way that might be effective, he is already so far gone that it doesn't matter. So if you idolize Joker, I get it, he's an interesting character. But if he's your idol, maybe you should reevaluate exactly what you think you saw in the movie. Because I don't think you really got it. So that's what I have for you regarding the film itself. Let's get into final thoughts. One of the biggest and probably the closest thing I can get to telling people about the point of this movie is you have to remove the Joker from the pedestal that a lot of people have put him on to really understand the point. The point the film is trying to make, that it's to the people who put Joker on this pedestal, is that you shouldn't put him on the pedestal for the behaviors that he exhibits. Because they are negative behaviors, they are negative coping mechanisms. They are not things that you idolize in people. They are not positive traits that you should look up to a character for. It's not just because he's a villain, or because he's mentally ill. It's simply because, due to the lack of care, the lack of respect, the lack of understanding that he received, made him a worse person simply because there was nothing else available for him to do. So he developed extremely negative coping mechanisms because he assumed those are the only ways that he could cope and that he could gain that sort of attention. So that's what he did. But that's not a reason to idolize someone for murder. And you shouldn't. Because if you do, then that says something about you that you probably don't want people associating with you. However, I will say this. It was an incredible movie. Joaquin Phoenix played Arthur Fleck incredibly. And I was honestly in awe of how he played this character and how well he was able to emote exactly what this character is struggling through, what he is struggling with, all of the traumas, all of these really awful things that happen to him, and how those things process in the brain of someone who has slipped so far down the hill that even if you stuck your hand out to him, he'd rather let go than grab it. So if you watched the film and all you got from it was Joker good, we live in a society bad, violence is the answer, maybe rewatch the film and do a little bit more critical thinking than you did the first time. Because if that was your only takeaway from this movie, maybe you probably shouldn't be a fan of the Joker. That wraps us up for this episode of One-Off Wonders. I will see everybody next week for a considerably lighter, but not much lighter, episode of Market Music. Bye.